Hi, it's Rebecca here from Precious Pages Papercraft, and I'm designing a layout today for Papermaze using the Spooky Nights collection from Simple Stories. So another Halloween layout from me, obviously, it's October, my favourite time of year. So I'm starting off with a cut file that I've purchased just from the Silhouette Design store. I've cut it from one of the pattern papers in the collection. It's the B-side of One Cool Ghoul. So it's a black paper with little skeletons all over it. And just by cutting it on that patterned paper as opposed to just black cardstock, just gives it a lot more interest, brings a bit more interest to the whole page in general. And also my little boy in the photo is wearing a skeleton tracksuit, so it kind of ties in nicely with that as well. I've decided I want a frame around my page, and I want a slightly sort of wider than normal frame. Normally I only sort of have 1/4 of an inch on each side. For this layout I wanted a bigger frame, and I'm using the B side of the Booyah pattern paper. It's black with different coloured stars on it, and it's gorgeous, one of my favourites, but it's quite impactful and it's really going to tie the layout together. So if I can do my maths correctly, I have cut it down to 10.5 inches squared, so I've cut 1.5 inches off of 2 sides. And I've just tacked that in place with some double-sided tape. I've not stuck tape all the way around because I want to stitch it down using my sewing machine, and it really is starting to protest against double-sided tape. It's getting all sticky and clogging my needle up. So I just tacked it in place and used my edge distressing tool, and I've gone around the edges and distressed all of those, and I'm going to try and fold them up and curl them up a bit just to distress it further. So I'm just doing a straight running stitch in black thread all around the outside of that white cardstock, and now I'm going to add a bit of zigzag stitch detail, but I am just going to test it out on some scrap cardstock first because my sewing machine hates zigzag stitch. I don't know what it is about it, but whenever I do it, it always does the zigzags on the back, and then on the front of my layout I get the messy stitching that should actually be on the back. So I don't know why, but I thought I'd test it first today. It did work, and then it all came unthreaded halfway through for some reason, as you can see here. I don't think I've ever used my sewing machine and everything's gone brilliantly from beginning to end. There's always some drama that happens with it. But I get there in the end, and I'm just going to do a bit of zigzag stitching in the corners on all 4 sides, so you can see there. And normally what I would do with machine stitching is I'd push those threads back to the back of the page and then kind of tie them off and tape them down to keep it neat. But actually with this layout I wanted the edges sort of cut. You'll see here what I mean. So you've got a bit of detail, you've got that loose thread, just adds a bit more of a distressed look to a Halloween layout, I feel. So I've taped it all down on the back, but I've left the black stitching on the front and just trimmed those off. And then I'm just distressing those edges. So I've got my cut file here. I'm just trimming the centre bit out of the pumpkin at the moment because I'm going to back that with one of the patterned papers from the collection. So I'm just getting that in place, or sort of ready to go, should I say. I've also cut an offset of this cut file as well, so it just makes the outside edge of the cut file slightly bigger than the cut file itself, if that makes sense. If you've got a cutting machine and you've done this before, you probably know what I mean, but for those that don't, it kind of extends it out further, so my cut file can now sit on top of this, and it kind of gives the cut file a border. So I've cut that just from white cardstock. I'm now adding some colour to it using a distress ink. This is Spiced Marmalade, this colour, it's orange, my favourite go-to sort of for Halloween layouts. So I've just used a blending brush, you can see there on my desk, just to add the colour. Now I'm using one of the Ranger foam pads, just going around the very outside edge, so the actual edge itself, with the same colour, just to darken it up, just like gives a bit of a darker edge to it. You'll probably see it better in the close-ups. And now I'm going to come in with some splatters on top of the same colour, just to give that cut file or that offset piece a bit more depth, a bit more interest, and it kind of brings a bit of texture to it as well. So whereas the first layer went on sort of dry mixed media, I'd call it, this is wet, it's going to go on as a different colour, it's going to dry darker. It just brings a bit of texture to the page, makes it look so much more interesting. So I've done that. I'm having a bit of a tidy up. It's winter at the moment, or it's not, it's autumn, but it feels like winter. My craft room is so dark, and I was sat here wondering why I was struggling to see what I was doing, and I've realised that in the last 2 weeks it's just got so dark during the days here. So I've ended up turning all my studio lights on so I can see what I'm doing here. So you might notice a change in the colour there. Now I'm just backing that pumpkin that I mentioned in the cut file. That is another patterned paper from the collection. It's called Candy Inspector. I've just picked one of the pumpkin faces that would fit nicely within the centre of that, and I've just framed that cut file piece with it. So I'm now going to trim around the edge, and I've got myself a little jack-o'-lantern in the middle of my cut file there. I love a bit of dimension on my layouts, so I quite often raise a lot of things, if not all things, up with foam pads. So I'm just going along the back of this cut file here, adding some foam pads, and I'm going to raise that up off of the orange offset section, so it will cast a shadow over that orange piece. Just makes it look a bit more interesting, and shadows kind of remind me of Halloween anyway, so the dimension really helps with that shadowing. So just gone to town with loads of those square pads, peeling the back off, and then I'll get that stuck down to the offset piece. There we go, and I absolutely love how that looks. So I'm going to have that in place in the middle. I've pulled out the bit of cardstock that I cut the offset section from, and I'm just using it to line up where I want the cut file. So I want to add some colour behind it, but I don't want to, or at the beginning, I didn't want to go too mad. I just wanted this kind of little glow of colour peeking out around the edge of the orange section. So I just used that as a template. Now I can see where the cut file is going to sit, and I can extend that colour out a bit further. And this is another distressing. It's called Twisted Citron, and it's like a lime green colour. And I intended initially just to have that tiny little area kind of like glowing underneath. But as always with me and mixed media, I get carried away, and I thought, no, I want to extend it further. And I'm going to put some embellishments on, so I was conscious that a lot of that would be covered up. So I extended it a bit further, and then I decided to come in with some splatters as well. Using the same Twisted Citron colour, I'm just going to go to town adding loads of splatters, and I'll bring the cut file back in every now and then and just see how it's looking, see if I need to add more. And I realise I need to add a lot more on kind of the inside section of that green. And just adding a bit more on top of that, and I'll just use a paper towel on this to dry it off. I do find with basil cardstock, if you don't use gesso like I haven't here, my splatters kind of bleed into the page. Because I've used distress inks and I've watered them down, they are very watery now, it does kind of bleed on the page, whereas acrylic paint doesn't bleed as much. But I knew I wasn't going to be adding loads of water, so I didn't bother with gesso. But if you want to prevent all the bleeding kind of look, then gesso is a way of preventing that. So now I've got my green sorted, I'm going to add some layers behind my photo. So I've added some white cardstock first, and now I'm adding some of that starry paper, that booyah paper behind, to kind of tie it all in together. And I'm going to have my photo sitting above my cut file there. There's kind of like a natural gap for it between the bat and the spider's web, so it sits quite nicely there. And it's slightly smaller than 3x4, this photo. When I was trimming it from the 6x4, I kind of caught the edge and it tore it a bit, so I had to trim it down a little bit more. Now I'm going to add a bit more detailing to that background. I want to add some foiling. So I've got a starry stencil here. This is by Echo Park, this one's also available at Papermaze. and I've got a embossing pen here. It's kind of got embossing fluid in it. So I've just kind of coloured in, if you like, some of the stencil stars on my background, just in a little cluster there. I've poured some bonding powder over it, and I'm going to heat that up in the same way that you would embossing powder, but I like to get this nice and hot. And then I'm going to stick this green foil on top of it and press it down. It does get really hot, so I do tend to burn my fingers every time, but I go push it down, and then I go over it with a pencil eraser, and as you can see, that foil then kind of transfers onto the background. And this didn't work perfectly, and I suspect my stencil has got some dried on texture paste from previous layouts. Despite me cleaning my stencil, sometimes I get so carried away I leave my cleaning to the end, and by that point the texture paste has kind of dried on. So my stars aren't perfect, but I like how they look, and they bring a nice shine to the layout, which looks lovely. And then I'm going to go and cover most of it up in a minute. So kind of done in vain, but it's another technique, so I've left it in so you can see how I'm doing it and the effect it gives. But yeah, afraid I do end up covering most of this with my embellishments. So I love how that's looking. My cut file's going to sit nicely in between those two clusters, but I've decided that because the green foil is so much darker than the Twisted Citron Distress ink I've used, I wanted to bring some darker tones of green in. So I'm adding some splatters in another distress ink now. This is Mowed Lawn, which is kind of more of I want to say primary green, but green isn't a primary colour, is it? It is literally, it's grass coloured green. I always find with distress inks that it's quite hard to get just kind of like your bog standard colours that aren't like pretty shades of things. But if you want just a standard green distress ink, Mowed Lawn is probably the one you're looking for. And it took me a while to figure that out, so I have different shades of greens, but Mowed Lawn is my kind of go-to, it's my favourite one. So I added some splatters on the background in that. I've added some foam behind that offset section of the cut file, so I'm raising it up again. So effectively that cut file has got loads of dimension now, it's got 2 layers to it. But like I said, it'll give a nice shadow effect, which I really love. And I'm doing the same with my photo, adding some foam behind that. And I've just moved my cut file down ever so slightly and straightened it up because it was a bit wonky. And then I've got my photo in place now, and then I can work on embellishing. So my photo is of my little boy. I think it was probably last Halloween actually. In fact, it was last Halloween. We didn't really get to do much in the way of trick-or-treating, as I mentioned in my last video. It was sort of pandemic time, so we went on a bit of a pumpkin walk, but I still decorated my doorstep in case other children were doing the same thing. I like to go all out for Halloween, so we had the whole doorstep decorated with all our pumpkins on display, and it's just a photo of my little boy sat amongst those with his little trick-or-treat bucket. So I wanted to kind of recreate that scene on my layout. So I've used some of the stickers from the combo stickers sheet. I stuck them onto white cardstock because I wanted to have a white border around the edge of them. I know some of the, what am I trying to say? Sorry, long day. Some of the die cut ephemera pieces in the bits and pieces pack that I'm going to bring in have got white border. So I'm trying to do the same thing with those stickers, and it makes them a bit more kind of sturdy, having that white cardstock on the back. So I'm going to create a cluster of pumpkins, just like I've got on my doorstep, just underneath my cut file there. And I've popped a little skeleton to the right of my photo with a little tombstone that says Halloween. And now I'm fussy cutting a couple of houses because my son sat on the doorstep, so I wanted houses to go with my clusters of pumpkins. And I'm trying to stick to the orange and green tones from the collection, so just using the orange and green houses. And I think I cut this second orange one and I didn't end up using it in the end. But again, I've left a tiny border on those. This now is the bits and pieces ephemera pack that I mentioned. I'm pulling some bits out of that. So I've got a little green trick-or-treat bag I've popped over on the right hand side. I've got that sign there that says beware, danger, stay out. That's got a white border on it, so that's what I was talking about, some of the bits having the white border. In fact, oh no, sorry, the green sticker is, I was going to say that was a sticker and it's not, that is from the Bits and Pieces pack. I'm confusing myself now. I've just added another pumpkin over onto the right there from the Bits and Pieces pack. Again, putting a white border on that, and I've got that little bunting underneath that says boo. The two bats you see up at the top there, they were part of the cut file, so they're cut from the same pattern paper, that one called Ghoul patterned paper. I did cut 3, but one of them kind of had a skeleton head where the face of the bat should have been, but it was upside down, so it really looked a bit bizarre, and it was bugging me because it was getting lost on the white background because the face was white. So I've left that one off, but I'm adding the 2 up the top, and then I'm going around raising everything up on foam pads to bring in a bit of that dimension, and where I've got things overlapping, the foam pad helps things to kind of sit nicely clustered on top of each other. So I'm almost done here. I get a bit ahead of myself and make up some black paint on the side there to add some splatters, and then realise I haven't quite finished. So I'm just going to leave that to one side, and I want to add some of the kind of word labels from the combo stickers sheet. So I've picked out 4 that kind of work with the colour scheme I've got going on. They say Candy Inspector, Home Sweet Haunted Home, Here for the Treats, and Chillin' Like a Villain. And I've just added those again to white cardstock so that I can give them a little white border. I'm going to raise those up on foam and have those kind of 2 on each side down the bottom there underneath my cut file. And then once they're in place, I'm going to finish off with those black splatters. So I've just watered down some black acrylic paint, and I'm splattering that all the way around, trying not to get it on my photo. You might notice I've just dripped a huge dollop of black paint on one of my pumpkins, that big one in the middle there. Once I've turned the camera off, I kind of realise here and try with a tissue. It doesn't work. So once I've turned the camera off, I get baby wipes out and try and get it off with some baby wipes. You can see there it did not work. So be careful with black splatters. But that's my layout finished. So thank you very much for joining me today. It's a slightly longer video than normal. All of my videos are coming out a bit longer lately. Sorry about that. Just adding mixed media takes time, I guess, and I didn't want to cut any of the process out. But I will leave you with loads of close-ups. I'll pop a link in the description box below to the Papermaze website and to this collection if you would like to go and have a look. A couple of bits have sold out now, but plenty of it was still in stock when I made this video, so hopefully by the time it goes live it will still be in stock. But thanks again, and I'll see you next time.